Burton. Mr. Burton, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My area of expertise is Chinese domestic politics and foreign policy. I was educated in the People's Republic of China and subsequently worked in the CSE and in the Canadian Diplomatic Service and as an academic. I published several articles and reports on Chinese influence operations in Canada. I will focus my remarks on Part 4 of Bill C-70, the Foreign Influence Transparency and Accountability Act, as it impinges on the activities of agents of the Chinese Ministry of State Security targeting Canadian politicians. This is about more than foreign powers trying to rig election outcomes through hidden methods. China's Ministry of State Security, collaborating with the Chinese Communist Party's massive United Front Work Department, has a two-pronged strategy for subverting legislatures around the world to serve Beijing's purposes. The first maneuver is a policy called Huaran Sanzheng, which means getting persons of Chinese origin elected to public office at all levels. The allegations that China's consulate in Toronto bussed in young Chinese nationals to stuff a nomination meeting in a safe Liberal riding and provided false IDs to enhance fraudulent claims that these youngsters were residents in the riding is a classic MSS, Ministry of State Security, game plan for swaying elections in any country that is lax in its democratic institutional processes. Beijing has an ironclad expectation that anyone of Chinese origin, as descendants of the mythical Yellow Emperor Huangdi, have an irrevocable requirement of loyalty to China. The Chinese Ministry of State Security's second tactic is longer-term cultivation of people who are not ethnic Chinese, but who can influence Canada's domestic and foreign policy to promote Chinese interests. Typically, it starts early in a politician's career through a strategy of spreading the net wide to support specific candidates, often mobilized through the police stations and other front organizations. Those who wittingly or semi-wittingly become China's political proxies will often be offered free trips to China through friendship associations, including the Canada-China Legislative Association. This approach will have proven very fruitful for the Chinese authorities if any of the parliamentarians cited in the latest NSICOP report have risen to federal cabinet with access to cabinet secrets. The subversion of Canadian officials may derive from bribery, blackmail, or these honeypots. 15 years ago, Member of Parliament Bob Deckert, the Parliamentary Secretary to Foreign Minister John Baird, admitted exchanging flirtatious emails with Shirong, a young Xinhua news agency reporter based in Canada. But when it was revealed that Ms. Shi had never published an article in the Chinese press, she rapidly disappeared to China, resurfacing a couple of months later as a scholar at Harvard's Kennedy School of Government, where so many future U.S. politicians spend their salad years. What we observe most, though, is that people who become friends to China while in a position of political influence derive rewards from the Chinese regime years later when the politician or senior civil servant returns to the private sector. When former Australian Prime Minister Bob Hawke traveled to China after leaving office, then President Jiang Zemin greeted him with the words, "Mr. Hawke, China never forgets its friends, and we want you to know we regard you as one of our best friends." In the 1980s as PM, Hawke had energetically encouraged Australia's South Pacific neighbors to embrace China's emergence onto the region's geopolitical stage. In the years that followed, Mr. Hawke took on several directorships and consultancy positions relating to China, which enabled him to achieve considerable financial success. There's more details about this in the op-ed I published in the Toronto Star this morning. Here in Canada, we can observe former cabinet ministers, ambassadors to China, and people retired from senior roles in our foreign ministry who have assumed lucrative China-related opportunities after leaving government. Let me conclude by observing that it will be very difficult for our future Foreign Influence Transparency and Accountability Act to track the silent implication of future payoffs for officials who took the Chinese Ministry of State Security's bait years earlier, but we must adopt other regulatory mechanisms to do so. Thank you, Mr. Chair.